July 15th, 1945, 2:23 p.m., Camp Swift, Texas. The examination room smelled of disinfectant and dust. A ceiling fan clicked overhead, pushing warm air in slow circles. Sunlight cut through the screen window and drew pale lines across the worn linoleum floor. Captain William Garrett stood beside the examination table, clipboard in hand. He was 42 years old, a doctor from Philadelphia who had seen war wounds in North Africa and Italy. He had treated men torn by shrapnel, lungs filled with infection, bodies thinned by poor rations. He thought he knew what starvation looked like. He was wrong. The door opened with a soft metal squeak. A young woman stepped inside, gripping the doorframe as if it were a crutch. She wore a faded German uniform, the fabric hanging loose on a frame that seemed too fragile to support it. Her name was Margaret Brenner. Everyone called her Greta. She was 24 years old, but she moved like someone 3 times her age. Lieutenant Ruth Dawson, a nurse from the Women's Army Corps, stood at her side. Dawson was 28, efficient, with brown hair pulled back in regulation style. "This way," Dawson said gently, guiding her toward the examination table. It was 12 feet away. It should have been nothing. Greta pushed herself forward. 1 step. Her legs trembled. 2nd step. Her hand shot out to grab the wall. She breathed hard, as if she had climbed a mountain. It took her 53 seconds to cover those 12 feet. Garrett watched. A tightness formed in his chest. At 24, she should have been strong. Instead, each step looked like a struggle against gravity itself. He began with the basics. Height, 5'6". Dawson wrote it down. Weight. The scale's needle settled. Dawson looked at the number, looked at Garrett, said nothing for a moment. 87 pounds. The room went quiet except for the fan. 87 pounds at 5'6". A healthy woman that height might weigh 130, 140 pounds. Garrett did the calculation in his head. Body mass index around 14. Normal would be close to 20 or 21. She was not just thin, she was in danger. Her blood pressure was low, her pulse fast but weak, her temperature slightly elevated. Up close, her cheeks were hollow. Her eyes looked too large for her face. The skin stretched tight over bone, translucent in places. "I need to examine your legs and feet," Garrett said through the interpreter. "Please remove your shoes and socks." Greta stared down at her boots. Her fingers trembled as she bent to untie the laces. The leather was cracked, rubbed shiny at the heels. "I cannot close my legs," she said in halting English, not looking up. "They shake. It hurts here." She touched the sides of her knees, then her ankles. When she pulled off the first boot, the smell hit them. Old sweat, damp cloth, something sharper, sour, the wound scent of hidden infection. She peeled away the thick sock. Garrett looked down and for a moment lost his professional calm. Her calves were sticks wrapped in skin. There was almost no muscle. The bones of her shin and ankle pushed forward like the edges of tools under thin cloth. Her feet were worse. Each toe was sharply outlined. Around her ankles and the sides of her feet were open sores. 12 of them, round and angry, some with a yellow edge, some raw and red. In places, the shoe had rubbed straight through skin onto bone. Dawson whispered something under her breath before catching herself. Garrett wrote in his notes. "Lower limbs show extreme muscle wasting. Multiple pressure ulcers on feet and ankles, some infected. Edema present at ankles despite overall emaciation." He had seen hunger before. He had never seen it cut this deep into a young woman's body. The strangest part was the swelling. Even at 87 pounds, her ankles were puffy, holding fluid. The contrast was shocking. Stick-thin legs ending in swollen joints. It was a classic sign that her body was failing. "How long have you had trouble walking?" the interpreter asked. Greta answered softly. "Since January, maybe February. The rations became small, then very small, then almost nothing. My legs stopped listening to me." Garrett finished his first examination in silence. He knew at once this was not a simple case of malnutrition. This was the end point of a long road of hunger that did not start in Texas. Outside the exam room, American fields were full. US soldiers ate 3 meals a day. Inside this room, an enemy from the losing side could barely move her legs together without pain. It was a cruel paradox. In the richest food nation on earth, the prisoner in front of them was starving to death. But Greta Brenner was not alone. Over the next 72 hours, Garrett would examine 29 more women from the same transport.
And what he would discover would change everything.
The women came, one by one. Greta sat in a wooden chair outside the examination room, waiting. She watched them file past. Some walked slowly, some needed support. All of them had the same look in their eyes, hollow, distant, the look of people who had traveled a long way from who they used to be. Through the thin walls, she could hear Garrett's voice, calm, clinical, repeating the same sequence: height, weight, blood pressure, and then always a pause. 92 pounds, 89 pounds, 95 pounds. Each number was a hammer blow. Greta closed her eyes and understood. This was not about her. This was about all of them. By the end of the third day, Garrett had completed 30 examinations. He sat at his desk in the medical office, the overhead light casting hard shadows across his paperwork. He had filled 17 pages with notes, numbers, observations, patterns that could not be ignored.
23 out of 30 women showed clear signs of severe malnutrition. 15 had body mass indexes below 16. That was not simply underweight, that was life-threatening. 8 had bleeding gums, loose teeth, bruises that did not match any injury, classic signs of scurvy. 6 had swelling in their legs or ankles, even though their bodies were skeletal. The average weight loss was 40 to 50 pounds per woman. Garrett wrote a note at the bottom of the final page. Findings consistent across majority of group. Evidence of 4 to 6 months of inadequate calories and multiple vitamin deficiencies. Condition not due to individual neglect, but to wider systemic breakdown. He looked at the name at the top of the first examination form. Brenner, Margaret, age 24. Occupation, administrative clerk, supply office, Hamburg. And there was the cruelest irony of all. Greta Brenner had managed food distribution. She had stamped ration cards. She had filed reports on warehouse inventories and train schedules.
Her job was to make sure supplies reached the people who needed them, and she had starved doing it. To understand how a healthy clerk from Hamburg had come to America with legs like twigs and feet full of wounds, Garrett would have to look back. To the last desperate months of a collapsing Reich, to the rations that shrank day by day until there was almost nothing left. January 8, 1945. Hamburg, Germany. Greta Brenner weighed 135 pounds. She worked in a grey office building 3 blocks from the Alster Basin. The Hamburg Verwaltungsgebäude, HVG for short. On her desk was a small brass button she used as a paperweight. It had fallen off a filing cabinet years ago. Someone had stamped letters into the metal. HVG, 1938. She kept it because it was solid, because in a world where everything seemed to be falling apart, it was something real she could hold. Her job was paper, lists of food,
Lists of fuel, train schedules, warehouse reports.
Forms were stamped, rations were counted. Her ration card gave her bread, a little meat, some fat. It was not rich, but it was enough. 1,200 calories a day, official allocation for clerical workers. Then the bombs came more often. February, March. Hamburg was hit again and again. At night, the sky glowed orange. Sirens screamed, the ground shook, warehouses burned, rail lines twisted in the heat. Greta remembered the taste of dust in her mouth, the grit that settled on her desk the next morning. As the destruction spread, the numbers on her forms began to change. Trains that had always arrived now did not. Warehouses that had always been full now reported shortages. The official ration dropped, 1,000 calories a day, then 900. The bread became darker, coarser. By the end of February, she weighed 122 pounds. March 15, 1945. The news came in the morning. The Elbe Bridge was down, bombed during the night. The main rail line into Hamburg was severed. Greta stood at her desk looking at the warehouse reports. Flour, 0 tons available. Potatoes, 0 tons. Meat, 0 tons. She was supposed to distribute these supplies to 3,000 workers, but the supplies did not exist. That day her ration dropped to 800 calories, thin soup, a crust of bread. Her stomach growled all day. Her fingers shook on the typewriter keys. She weighed 118 pounds. April 10th, 1945. The rations collapsed entirely. There was no sugar, no fat, no meat, just soup, mostly water with a few potato skins floating in it. Greta and the other women in her office ate anything they could find. Dandelion greens from the rubble-filled parks, nettle leaves, beet tops. Once, there were biscuits mixed with sawdust to make them larger. They ate them anyway. Greta kept a small notebook. On April 10th, she wrote one line. I stamped ration cards today for food that does not exist. I am distributing promises. She weighed 102 pounds. April 28th, 1945. There were days with no food at all. The HVG office was half empty now. The building itself was damaged. 2 floors were unusable. Greta walked to work because there was nowhere else to go. Her boots, once tight, now slipped on her feet. Each step opened blisters. The blisters became sores. On April 28th, there was no food in the canteen. No soup, no bread, nothing. Greta sat at her desk and held the brass button. HVG, 1938. She thought about the year stamped into the metal, 7 years ago. A different world. May 3rd, 1945. British forces entered Hamburg. Greta was at her desk when the soldiers came. She did not run. She could not run. She sat very still, holding the brass button in one hand. A British officer told them to stand, to line up, to prepare for transport. Greta stood. Her legs shook. She took the brass button and slipped it into her pocket. When they weighed her 2 days later at the temporary camp, the scale read 95 pounds. She had lost 40 pounds in 4 months. The Atlantic crossing took 2 weeks. The transport ship smelled of fuel and oil and metal. The sea was rough. Greta was seasick for days. Food was there, basic rations, but her stomach turned at the smell. Much of what she swallowed came back up. When the ship reached New York, she could barely stand through processing. The train ride to Texas took 4 days. 4 days of rattling wheels and short, careful steps to the latrine, always holding on to someone's arm. By the time she reached Camp Swift, she had lived under true starvation conditions for more than 5 months. She was not a soldier, she was an office clerk, a woman who had stamped papers and filed reports and tried to distribute food that did not exist. And now she stood in a medical examination room in Texas, weighing 87 pounds, unable to close her legs without pain. Garrett finished reading through his notes on the 30th examination. The pattern was undeniable. This was not about individual cases, this was systemic collapse. Germany, once famous for order and planning, had broken so badly that even its supply clerks were starving. He thought about the contrast. In Hamburg, Greta Brenner had stamped ration cards for food that did not exist. Here in Texas, American soldiers ate 3 meals a day. Camp Swift had full kitchens. The mess halls served over 3,000 calories per day. The Red Ball Express moved 12,500 tons of supplies every single day. 6,000 trucks, 23,000 men, operating around the clock. Meanwhile, the Reichsbahn had 70% of its track destroyed, bridges down, warehouses empty. The entire supply chain had simply stopped functioning. Greta had been on the wrong side of that equation, but now she was here, and Garrett had a decision to make. He picked up his pen and began to write a second report. All incoming prisoners of war require full medical examination with focus on nutritional status. Those with BMI below 17 require special dietary protocol and medical oversight. Request authorization to establish dedicated medical ward for treatment of severe malnutrition. He signed his name, Captain William Garrett, Medical Corps. Then he walked down the hall to Major Theodore Walsh's office. Walsh was 50 years old, the chief medical officer of Camp Swift. He read Garrett's report slowly, his expression tightening with each line. When he finished, he looked up. "This is worse than we expected." "Yes, sir." "You're saying nearly 80% of this transport shows signs of serious malnutrition." "That's correct, sir. And several cases are critical. Without intervention, some of them may not survive." Walsh tapped the report. "This will require resources, beds, nursing staff, special food supplies."
"I know, sir."
"These are enemy prisoners. They are patients, sir." The room was quiet for a moment. Walsh set the report down. "The Geneva Convention requires adequate medical treatment." "Yes, sir. And beyond legal obligation, it's the right thing to do." Walsh nodded slowly. "All right, Captain. You'll have your ward. 20 beds. I'll assign Lieutenant Dawson and 2 additional nurses. You'll report weekly on progress. And Garrett, if you're going to do this, do it right. Document everything." "Understood, sir." Garrett left the office with authorization to begin. As he walked back down the corridor, he thought about Greta Brenner sitting in that wooden chair, waiting, about the brass button she kept in her pocket, about how she had managed food distribution for thousands while starving herself, about how she had come to America as an enemy and would now become something else, a patient, a case study, a life to be saved. He did not know it yet, but in the months ahead, Greta Brenner would become the center of something larger than either of them could imagine. Her recovery would be documented in meticulous detail. Her case would be studied, published, taught in medical schools. But that was all in the future. Right now, Garrett had a more immediate task. He had to figure out how to feed a starving woman without killing her. Because that was the terrible paradox he was about to learn. When someone has been starving for months, food itself can become a weapon. Give them too much too fast, and their damaged body could fail. The heart could stop. It was called refeeding syndrome, and it was deadly. Garrett would have to walk a knife's edge. He opened a medical textbook and began to read. He would start with 1,200 calories a day, 6 small meals, soft foods, broth, porridge, monitor her closely, daily weights, blood pressure, heart rate. Then, if all went well, increase gradually. 1,500 calories, 1,800. Add vitamins, week by week, ounce by ounce, bringing her back from the edge. Outside, the Texas sun was setting. In a barracks at the edge of the compound, carpenters were already stripping out old bunks, preparing to install hospital beds. The medical ward was being born. And Greta Brenner, who could not close her legs without shaking, who weighed 87 pounds, who carried a brass button from a building that no longer stood, was about to begin a journey back to life, one careful calorie at a time. July 16th, 1945, 8 a.m. The medical ward was a long wooden barracks at the edge of the compound. The army had stripped out the old bunks and lined the walls with metal hospital beds, white sheets, thin pillows. The air smelled of soap and boiled linens and disinfectant. 8 women were moved there first, the worst cases. Greta Brenner was assigned bed number 3. When she lay flat, her bones pressed through the mattress. Lieutenant Ruth Dawson helped her settle in, adjusting the pillow. "You'll be comfortable here," Dawson said. Greta looked around the ward, 7 other women, all of them sharing the same hollowed look. "Why?" Greta asked in halting English. "Why do this for us?" Dawson paused. "Because you need help, and we can give it." Captain Garrett walked the row of beds, clipboard in hand. He stopped at each one, checking pulses, temperatures, blood pressures. When he reached Greta's bed, he pulled up a wooden chair and sat down, eye level with her. "Miss Brenner," he said through the interpreter, "I'm going to explain what happens next. We're going to feed you, but we have to do it carefully, very carefully. Your body has been starving for months. It has forgotten how to process food properly. If we give you too much too quickly, it could make you very sick. It could even kill you." Greta's eyes widened. "So we start slow, small meals, 6 times a day, and we watch you closely. Every day we measure, Every day we adjust. Do you understand? Yes, Greta whispered. You save me slowly. Garrett almost smiled. Yes, exactly. The first meal arrived at 8:30. Thin oatmeal, a spoonful of mashed potato, a small slice of soft white bread, weak tea with a little sugar. To a healthy soldier, it would look like nothing. To Greta, it was the most food she had seen in months. She ate slowly. Dawson insisted. One spoonful at a time, Greta. Wait. Breathe. Another spoonful. After 4 bites of oatmeal, Greta's stomach cramped. She felt sick. Stop, Dawson said immediately. That's enough for now. Greta looked at the half-full bowl. There is so much, she whispered, but my body has forgotten. Your body will remember, Dawson said. Give it time. Across the ward, similar scenes played out. Women eating tiny portions, stopping when their bodies rebelled. Garrett moved from bed to bed, observing, taking notes. By the end of the first day, he had filled 6 pages with observations. Brenner, Margarita. Intake, approximately 400 calories total across 6 meals. Nausea after 4th meal. No vomiting. Pulse, 88. Weight unchanged at 87 pounds. The goal for week 1 was 1,200 calories per day. Greta had managed only 400, but Garrett was not discouraged. This was progress. She had kept the food down. Small victories. July 17th, 1945. Day 2. Greta woke to pale sunlight. Breakfast arrived. Oatmeal again. A soft-boiled egg this time. She managed 6 spoons of oatmeal, half the egg. The cramping was less severe. Her stomach seemed to understand slowly that food was no longer the enemy. By the end of day 2, Greta had consumed approximately 600 calories. Garrett made his evening rounds. He sat beside her bed and checked her pulse. How do you feel? Tired, Greta said. Always tired, but less fog. In my head. That's good. The fog will lift more each day. He showed her small white pills. This is vitamin C for your gums, and this is vitamin D for your bones, and this is B complex for your nerves. You'll take these every day. The pills were chalky and bitter on her tongue, but she swallowed them. July 22nd, 1945. End of week 1. The morning weigh-in was always the moment of truth. Greta stood on the scale, gripping Dawson's arm for balance. The needle settled. 87 pounds. Unchanged. Greta's face fell. I eat and eat, but nothing. Actually, Garrett said, looking at his charts, this is exactly what we expected. Your body is rebalancing fluids. The fact that you're stable at 87 means you're starting to build tissue. It just doesn't show yet. Over the past week, Greta had consumed an average of 900 calories per day. Her body was adjusting. The worst of the cramping had passed. And there were other changes, small ones. The constant chill she had felt for months was easing. Her hands did not shake quite as much. 4 of the 12 wounds on her feet were beginning to close at the edges. Week 2, Garrett announced, we increased to 1,500 calories. Your body is ready. July 23rd, 1945. Week 2 begins. The food changed, became richer. Breakfast, oatmeal with cream, a whole egg, toast with butter. Lunch, chicken soup with actual pieces of chicken, mashed potatoes, cooked carrots, milk. Greta ate slowly, carefully, but with increasing confidence. Her stomach had remembered its purpose. On July 25th, she ate her entire lunch without stopping. It was a milestone. Dawson squeezed her shoulder. Well done. I am hungry, Greta said, almost surprised. For the first time in months, I am actually hungry. July 28th, 1945. 10:30 p.m. The ward was dark except for a single bulb burning at the nurses' station. Most of the women were asleep. Greta lay awake. She was hungry. Not the gnawing, desperate hunger of Hamburg, just normal hunger, the kind that asked politely for more. She knew there was a small storage area at the end of the ward. She had seen Dawson go there earlier. She had also seen, through the half-open door, shelves with food, bread, butter. Greta knew she should not, knew the protocol was strict, but the hunger whispered, just a little more. She slipped out of bed. Her legs were stronger now. She could walk without shaking. She moved quietly down the row of beds toward the storage room. The door was unlocked. Inside, dim light from a window showed the shelves. She saw a loaf of white bread, a crock of butter. She took 3 slices, spread butter thickly on each one, and ate them standing there in the dark. It was the best food she had ever eaten. She returned to bed feeling satisfied for the first time since January. July 29th, 1945, 5:45 a.m. Greta woke with her heart racing. At first she thought it was a dream, but the pounding in her chest was real, fast, too fast, like a drum roll that would not stop. She tried to sit up. The room spun. Sweat broke out on her forehead, cold and clammy. She tried to call out, but her voice came out as a whisper. She gripped the bed frame. Her hands were shaking violently. At 6 a.m., Dawson began her morning rounds. She took one look at Greta and knew. "Doctor," she called. "Dr. Garrett! It's Greta!" Garrett was in the ward in less than 2 minutes. He went straight to Greta's bed, took her wrist, felt her pulse. 148 beats per minute. Normal was 60 to 80. "Greta," he said firmly, "look at me. Did you eat anything last night? Anything not on your meal plan?" Greta's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. "Bread," she whispered. 3 slices, with butter. I was hungry. I am sorry." Garrett's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "How much butter?" "Much. Too much." He turned to Dawson. "Get me an IV set up. Potassium chloride, magnesium sulfate, now." Garrett pulled up the EKG machine, attached the leads to Greta's chest. The readout showed what he feared. Abnormal rhythm. Her heart was struggling. Refeeding syndrome. When a starved body suddenly receives too much food too quickly, electrolytes in the blood can shift dramatically. Potassium, magnesium, phosphate, all the minerals that keep the heart beating properly. Greta's body had grabbed those 3 slices of bread and metabolized them desperately, and in doing so, had stripped minerals from her blood faster than her system could replace them. Now, her heart was paying the price. "Greta," Garrett said, keeping his voice steady, "you're going to be all right, but I need you to stay very still. We're going to give you fluids through this needle. It's going to balance your blood chemistry." "I did not know," Greta whispered. Tears ran down her temples. "I did not know food could kill me." "You didn't know," Garrett agreed. "But now we fix it." Dawson returned with the IV supplies. Together they inserted the line into Greta's arm. Clear fluid began dripping into her vein. Potassium, magnesium, phosphate. Garrett stayed beside her bed, watching the EKG, watching her pulse. Every 5 minutes he checked. 6:30 a.m. Pulse, 148. 6:45 a.m. Pulse, 132. 7 a.m. Pulse, 120. 8 a.m. Pulse, 82. By 9:15 a.m., Greta's heart rate had stabilized at 78 beats per minute. The crisis was passing. Garrett sat back in his chair and allowed himself to breathe. "You're stable," he told Greta. "Your heart is back to normal rhythm." Greta was crying openly now. "I almost died because of bread." "You didn't know," Garrett said again. "I should have explained better. Should have locked that storage room." "I wanted to feel full," Greta said. "Just once." Garrett understood. She had been hungry for months. Of course she wanted more. But her body was not ready. Not yet. "We'll get you there," Garrett promised. "To where you can eat normally again, feel full again. But it takes time." That afternoon, he called a meeting. July 29th, 1945, 3 p.m., Major Walsh's office. Walsh sat behind his desk. Garrett stood in front of it. 2 other officers were present. Walsh held Garrett's incident report. "You almost lost a patient." "Yes, sir. Because she ate bread. Because her body wasn't ready for the amount she ate, sir. When someone has been starving, their metabolism changes. If they suddenly consume too much, it can cause electrolyte imbalances. The heart can fail. It's called refeeding syndrome. A logistics officer spoke up. So we're using medical resources and special supplies to treat enemy prisoners, and it's still dangerous. It is dangerous, Garrett agreed. But it's manageable if we're careful. Are you being careful enough? Walsh asked. I thought I was, Garrett said honestly. I'll do better. The storage room is now locked. Meals will be even more strictly controlled. A line officer leaned forward. Captain, some of my men are asking why we're dedicating significant resources to German prisoners when we have American soldiers in the hospital. The room went quiet. Garrett chose his words carefully. Sir, the Geneva Convention is clear. Prisoners of war are entitled to adequate medical care. That's not about kindness, it's about legal obligation. And beyond that, these women aren't soldiers. They're clerks, office workers. They didn't fight. They managed paperwork. The system they worked for collapsed and starved them. If we can save them, we should. Because that's what separates us from the regime they served. Walsh studied Garrett for a long moment. You believe that? I do, sir. Walsh set down the report. All right, Captain. You can continue. But I want daily reports. Any sign of another crisis, you inform me immediately. Understood, sir. As Garrett left the office, he felt the weight of what he had just committed to. He was not just treating patients, he was defending a principle, that standards mattered, that even in war, even with enemies, there were lines that should not be crossed. America had standards, protocols. The Geneva Convention was not just words on paper, and Garrett would uphold it. Because that was the difference. That was what separated a nation that fed its enemies from a nation that let its own people starve. July 31st, 1945. Greta was still weak, but out of danger. The IV had been removed. She was back on carefully measured meals. Garrett sat beside her bed during evening rounds. How do you feel? Ashamed, Greta said quietly. Don't be. You made a mistake. Now you know. You saved me twice, Greta said. Once from hunger, now from food. That's my job. No, Greta insisted. Your job is to care for your soldiers, not for me. Garrett considered this. My job is to practice medicine. You're a patient who needs medical care. That's all that matters. In Germany, Greta said slowly, we were told Americans were cruel, that you would torture prisoners, that your cities were in ruins and your people starving just like us. And now? Now I know they lied. About everything. Greta reached under her pillow and pulled out the brass button. HVG 1938. She held it in her palm. This is from my office building in Hamburg. I kept it because it was real, because everything else was lies. The ration cards promised food that did not exist. But this button was real. I could hold it. She looked at Garrett. You are real too. You do not lie. The food is real. The medicine is real. Even when I did a stupid thing, you did not punish me. You saved me. Greta, what happened to you was not normal. That was not how things are supposed to work. You were part of a system that collapsed. I know, she whispered. I stamped ration cards for food that did not exist. I was part of the lie. You were a clerk, doing her job. You didn't create the system, you were trapped in it. Greta closed her hand around the button. Will you help me write a letter? To my mother? Of course. I want to tell her I am alive, and that I am being cared for. She will not believe it, but it is true. August 15th, 1945. End of week 4. Morning weigh-in. Greta stood on the scale, no longer needing support. Her legs were steady now. The needle settled. 95 pounds. 8 pounds gained in 4 weeks. 2 pounds per week. Exactly on target. Dawson marked it on the chart. Garrett smiled. You're doing well. The wounds on Greta's feet had healed. 12 angry sores had become 12 pink scars. Her gums no longer bled.
Her hair was growing back. She could walk the length of the ward without tiring, could climb stairs slowly, could sit up for an hour without exhaustion. Small things, normal things, things she had taken for granted in January. Now they felt like miracles. By week 6, Greta weighed 100 pounds. By week 8, 105 pounds. By week 10, 109 pounds. She helped Dawson with small tasks, folding linens, organizing meal trays. Not because she had to, because she wanted to feel useful again. December 10th, 1945. Week 20. Greta weighed 105 pounds and had plateaued there for 2 weeks. Garrett was not concerned. Her body was finding its equilibrium. She could walk 2 miles now, could climb stairs without breathlessness, could think clearly, plan ahead, remember things. The Red Cross had announced that some prisoners would be allowed to send letters home. Greta sat at a small table in the ward, a sheet of paper in front of her, a pen in her hand, the brass button beside the paper, her talisman. How did she tell her mother that she was safe, gaining weight, sleeping in a clean bed in Texas, while Hamburg lay in ruins? She began simply, "Mutter, ich lebe." Mother, I am alive. The words came slowly after that. She wrote about the final months, the thinning rations, the endless walking, the sores on her feet. She wrote about Captain Garrett, about how he had seen her feet and been shocked, about how he had created a plan to feed her carefully, slowly, bringing her back from the edge. And then she wrote the hardest line of all. "Mutter, I eat better here as a prisoner than you probably do in Hamburg. I receive 3 meals daily. I have gained weight. I can walk again. The Americans have been correct and humane, not cruel as we were told. I feel grateful, but I also feel guilty. I am healing while you likely still struggle." She signed the letter, used the brass button to hold down the corner while the ink dried. The letter left Texas in mid-December. It traveled slowly through Red Cross channels, across the Atlantic, into a Germany where post offices were broken and streets were blocked. It took nearly 3 months to reach Hamburg. Final 8th, 1946. Hildegard Brenner received her daughter's letter. She sat in a room she shared with 4 other women. The building had no heat. Water came from a pump in the courtyard. The official ration was 1,100 calories per day. The actual ration was closer to 800. Hildegard was 52 years old. She weighed 98 pounds. She read Greta's letter 3 times. Then she cried. Not from sadness, from relief. She wrote back immediately. The paper was thin and rough. "Mein liebste Greta, do not feel guilt for being fed. It is a mother's comfort to know her child lives and heals. Hamburg is in ruins. The HVG building where you worked is only a shell. We live in crowded rooms and wait in lines for bread. But we survive. I am glad the Americans treat you well. Come home when you are allowed. We will rebuild together. Your loving Mutter." The letter reached Texas in late April. Greta read it sitting on her bed, Dawson beside her. When she finished, she folded it carefully and held it against her chest. "My mother tells me not to feel guilty," she said. "But I eat 3 meals while she eats 1. How can I not?" "Because your mother wants you to live," Dawson said gently. "That's what mothers do." Greta nodded, but the tears came anyway. That night, Garrett made his final notes for week 24. Patient Brenner. Weight stable at 105 pounds. Full recovery of mobility. Wounds healed. Mental state improved significantly. Correspondence with family re-established. Preparing for repatriation evaluation. He closed the file and sat back. In 6 months, Greta Brenner had gone from 87 pounds to 105. From unable to walk 12 feet to capable of walking miles. From the edge of death to the threshold of life. It was not a miracle. It was science, protocol, careful measurement, and patient application of knowledge. But sometimes, science felt like a miracle anyway. And now, Greta Brenner was ready to go home. March 20th, 1946, Camp Swift Medical Ward. The final examination took place in the same room where it had all begun. 8 months had passed since that July afternoon when Greta Brenner had stood on a scale and heard the number that would change everything.
87 pounds. Now she stood on that same scale, steady on her own feet, no longer needing support. The needle settled. 118 pounds. Garrett wrote the number in his log. Then he smiled. 31 pounds in 32 weeks. Textbook recovery. Greta looked at the number, tried to comprehend it. She remembered the woman who could not walk 12 feet. That woman felt like someone else now. Garrett conducted the physical examination one last time. Blood pressure, normal. Pulse, 72, strong and steady. He examined her feet. The 12 wounds had healed completely. 12 pink scars remained. He checked her gums. No bleeding. He had her walk across the room. Her gait was normal, strong. "Climb those stairs for me," he said. Greta climbed them easily, up and down. No breathlessness. Garrett made notes. Full recovery of mobility. All wounds healed. Nutritional status restored to healthy range. Patient capable of normal physical activity. Cleared for repatriation. He set down his pen and looked at her. "Greta, when you arrived here, I wasn't sure you would survive. Your body was shutting down. But you made it. You did the hard work of healing." "You saved me," Greta said simply. "We saved you together." Greta reached into her pocket and pulled out the brass button. HVG, 1938. She had carried it every day for 8 months. "I want you to have something," Garrett said. He opened a drawer and removed a manila folder. Inside were papers, charts, photographs. "This is a copy of your complete medical record. Every measurement, every note, every photograph. I want you to keep it." Greta took the folder, confused. "Why?" "Because someday someone might need to understand what you went through, how you recovered. This record could help save lives. Keep it safe." "I will guard it." "And Greta, one more thing." Garrett pulled a single sheet of paper from his notebook. It was covered in his handwriting, numbers, calculations, instructions. "This is the protocol that brought you back, week by week. If you ever need to help someone who's starving, this is how you do it." Greta looked at the paper, then at the brass button in her palm. 2 objects, one from a building that no longer stood, one from a doctor who had seen her when she could not see herself. "I will keep both," she said. "Always." April 15th, 1946. Hamburg Hauptbahnhof. The train pulled into the station at 4:17 in the afternoon. Steam rose. The platform was crowded with people. Thin people, grey people. Greta stepped down from the train car. For a moment, she could not move, could not breathe. Hamburg. She had imagined this moment for months. But nothing could have prepared her for this. 60% of the city was gone. Buildings stood like broken teeth, walls without roofs, windows without glass. The great HVG building where she had worked was a shell, 4 walls standing, everything inside burned away. The smell was what struck her first. Burned brick, lime dust, damp stone. The sound was worse. Silence. No factory whistles, no train horns except the one that had brought her. Just the quiet scrape of footsteps. And the people. Everyone was thin. Their clothes hung loose. Their faces were hollowed. They moved slowly. She saw a woman pushing a cart filled with bricks. The woman was perhaps 40, but she looked 60. Greta understood. This woman was rebuilding, 1 brick at a time. "Greta!" Her mother was pushing through the small crowd. Hildegard Brenner was 52 years old. She weighed 98 pounds. Her dress was mended in a dozen places. Her hair had gone completely grey. But she was alive. They held each other and cried, 2 women who had survived. "Let me look at you," Hildegard said, pulling back. Her hands framed Greta's face. "You are healthy. They fed you. They truly fed you." "They did, Mutter. Everything I wrote was true." Hildegard touched Greta's cheek, her arm, feeling the solid flesh. "You are stronger than me now." It was true. Greta weighed 20 pounds more than her mother. The contrast was devastating. They walked home together. Home was now 2 rooms in a building that had partially survived. Hildegard shared the space with 3 other women. There was no heat except a small stove. Water came from a pump in the courtyard.
but the roof was intact. In Hamburg in 1946, that was wealth. That evening they ate dinner together. The ration was thin soup and a piece of dark bread, maybe 600 calories total. Greta ate slowly, making it last. She thought about the medical ward in Texas.
About 3 meals every day. Here, 1 meal. And it was not enough. Tomorrow, Greta said, I will find work. April 22nd, 1946. British Control Commission, Hamburg District Office. Greta stood in line for 3 hours. When she finally reached the desk, a British officer looked up at her. Name? Margaret Brenner. Occupation? Administrative clerk. Supply office management. I have experience with food distribution. The officer's eyebrows rose. Food distribution? In Germany during the war? Yes, sir. I worked at the Hamburg Verwaltungsgebäude. I managed ration card processing for 3,000 workers. We need people who understand German food distribution systems. We're trying to rebuild the ration network. Can you start Monday? Greta blinked. Yes, sir, absolutely. You'll be working with our nutrition assessment team. We're trying to identify who needs help most urgently. Do you have any medical training? No, sir, but I learned some things. In America, about malnutrition, about how to recognize it. The officer looked at her more carefully. You were a prisoner there? Yes, sir. And they taught you about nutrition? They saved my life with it, sir. I learned by being saved. The officer wrote something on a form and handed it to her. An employment authorization. She had been home for 1 week, and already she had work. But more than that, she had purpose. May 1946. Hamburg District Nutrition Assessment Program. Greta's job was simple in theory. Walk through neighborhoods, knock on doors, ask people about their food intake, look for signs of severe malnutrition. In practice, it was heartbreaking. She saw children with swollen bellies, old people who could barely walk, women who fainted from hunger. But she also saw what Garrett had taught her to see: body mass index, signs of vitamin deficiency, edema, the specific markers that meant someone was not just hungry, but dying. One afternoon, she knocked on a door in the Altona district. A woman answered, mid-30s, 2 children clinging to her skirt. Greta asked the standard questions. The woman's answers were what Greta expected. 1 meal most days, soup and bread. No meat in 3 weeks. But it was the woman's legs that made Greta stop. Swollen ankles, despite an obviously thin frame. The same paradox she had seen in Texas. May I examine your legs? Greta asked. The woman allowed it. Greta pressed her thumb into the swollen ankle. The depression remained for several seconds. Pitting edema, a sign of protein deficiency. You need additional rations, Greta said. I'm going to submit an urgent request. They will not approve it, the woman said dully. Because I know the signs, Greta said. I know what happens if we wait, and I will not let it happen. She filled out the form that evening, marked it urgent, cited specific medical observations. 3 days later, the woman received supplemental rations, extra milk powder, protein biscuits. It was a small victory. 1 woman in a city of hundreds of thousands, but it was a victory Greta understood. She had been that woman, and now she could give that gift to others. June 1947, 15 months after returning home. Greta sat in the small room she now rented alone. She had received a letter from America, from Captain William Garrett. The envelope was thick. Inside was a copy of a medical journal, Military Medicine, Volume 112, Issue 3, March 1947. A paper was marked. The title, Refeeding Protocol for Severe Malnutrition, a Case Study Analysis. Author, Captain William J. Garrett. Greta began to read. The paper was technical, full of medical terminology, charts, graphs, and then she saw her own name. Patient M. B., female, age 24, presented July 1945 with severe malnutrition. Height 167 centimeters, weight 39.5 kilograms, BMI 14.2. She turned pages and found photographs. Her own feet,
Before and after. A graph showing her weight gain, week by week, a steady upward line. At the end, Garrett had written, "Case MB demonstrates that severe malnutrition can be safely reversed through careful caloric progression and vitamin supplementation. This protocol may have applications beyond military prisoner populations, including civilian famine relief and humanitarian crisis response." Greta sat back. Her hands were shaking slightly. He had taken her suffering and made it meaningful, had documented it so carefully that others could learn from it, so that somewhere, someday, another person might be saved because of what she had endured. She pulled out paper and began to write. "Dear Captain Garrett, I received your letter and the journal. I read your paper 3 times. I never imagined my case would be studied this way. You have made me famous in science, though I do not feel I deserve it. I am now working for the British Control Commission. I help identify severe malnutrition cases in Hamburg. I use what you taught me. Last month, I helped 15 people receive urgent supplemental rations. When I see someone with swollen ankles and thin legs, I think of you examining my feet. I think of how you saw me when I could not see myself, and I try to do the same for others. Thank you for making my suffering count for something. With gratitude, Margareta Brenner." 1950, 4 years after returning home. Greta had married. Her husband was Klaus Hoffmann. He had been a prisoner in France. He told similar stories, of being treated correctly, of being fed when his own country could not feed its people. They understood each other. They had a small apartment now. Klaus worked in reconstruction. Greta still worked in nutrition assessment. One evening Klaus asked, "Do you still think about Texas?" "Every day," Greta said. "Do you ever regret that the enemy fed you better than your own country did?" Greta was quiet for a long moment. "No, I regret that my country let me starve, but I am grateful that someone cared enough to save me, even though I was supposed to be his enemy." She showed Klaus the brass button, HVG 1938, and the folder of papers, her complete medical record, and the protocol sheet, now worn from being unfolded many times. "I keep these," she said, "because they remind me. They remind me that propaganda lies, that what we were told about Americans was false, that cruelty is a choice, and so is kindness." Klaus held the button. "We came as conquerors. We left as students." "Yes," Greta agreed. "We thought we would rule Europe. Instead, we learned that logistics matter more than ideology, that standards matter more than speeches, that a nation that feeds its enemies is stronger than one that starves its own people." 1955, 9 years after returning, a daughter, Ingrid, 5 years old, with blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile. Greta and Ingrid sat together at the kitchen table. Outside, Hamburg was rebuilding, new buildings rising, the scars were fading. "Mama, what is this?" Ingrid held up the brass button. "That is from a building where I used to work," Greta said. "Before you were born, before the war ended." "Why do you keep it?" "Because it reminds me where I came from, and it reminds me of someone who helped me when I needed help very much." "Who helped you?" "A doctor, in America. When I was sick, he made me better." "Was he nice?" "Yes, Liebling, he was very nice. He saw me when I could not see myself." Ingrid turned the button over in her small hands. "Can I keep it?" "Someday," Greta promised. "Someday when you are older, I will give it to you, and I will tell you the whole story, about being hungry, about being saved, about how enemies can show kindness, and you will remember it." 1974, May 12th, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. William Garrett died at the age of 71. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II, his work as a physician, his publications on nutritional medicine. When his family sorted through his papers, they found files, hundreds of pages. One file was thicker than the others, 89 pages, labeled Case MB, Brenner, Margareta. Inside were measurements, charts, photos of feet, before and after, a graph showing weight gain, and at the back, letters, dozens of letters spanning 28 years. The last letter was dated March 1974,
2 months before Garrett's death. Dear Captain Garrett, Ingrid is 19 now. She asks questions about the war, about how I survived. I showed her your protocol. I told her about you. She wants to study medicine. She says she wants to help people the way you helped me. I think you would be proud. The family decided to donate his papers to the Philadelphia Medical Archive. All of it, including the 89 pages about a German clerk who had weighed 87 pounds.
On the donation form, they wrote, "These documents represent my father's belief that medicine transcends politics, that patients are human beings first. He would want these records preserved so others can learn." 2003, October 17th, Hamburg. Margareta Brenner died at the age of 82. She died in her sleep, peacefully. Her daughter Ingrid was 53, a physician specializing in nutrition. She had indeed followed in Garrett's footsteps. When Ingrid sorted through her mother's belongings, she found a small wooden box. Inside were 3 things: the brass button, HVG 1938, the protocol sheet, yellow and fragile, and 52 letters spanning 28 years. Ingrid read them all, sitting at her mother's kitchen table. The last letter her mother had written was dated 6 months before her death. She had never sent it. Dear Dr. Garrett, I know you have been gone many years, but I still write to you sometimes, to tell you things, to thank you again. Ingrid is a doctor now. She helps people with nutrition. She learned from your protocol. Your work continues through her. You saved more than just me. You saved knowledge, and knowledge saves lives still. Ingrid made a decision. She contacted the Hamburg City Archive, arranged to donate everything: the button, the protocol, the letters, her mother's complete medical records from Camp Swift. These belong to history, she told the archivist. They tell a story about war and hunger and humanity, about what happens when systems collapse, and about what happens when someone chooses to care anyway. The archivist assigned the collection a number, Box 23, the Brenner Collection. It sits in the climate-controlled storage of the Hamburg City Archive, available to researchers, students, anyone who wants to understand. 2025, present day. A researcher sits in the Hamburg City Archive reading room. She has requested Box 23, the Brenner Collection. The archivist brings a grey archival box. Inside, wrapped in acid-free tissue, are 3 objects. A brass button, small, tarnished, stamped with letters HVG 1938. A sheet of paper, yellowed and fragile, covered in careful handwriting, numbers, dosages, week-by-week instructions, the protocol. And at the bottom of the box, 52 letters, tied with string that was once white, now cream with age. The researcher opens the first letter carefully, dated December 10th, 1945. Mutter, ich lebe. I am alive. She opens the last letter, dated March 1974. Never sent. Dear Dr. Garrett, I know you have been gone many years, but I still write to you sometimes. The researcher sits back, thinks about the distance between these 2 letters, 29 years, a lifetime of gratitude spanning an ocean. She picks up the brass button, holds it in her palm, feels its weight. This small piece of metal outlived the building it came from, outlived the woman who carried it, outlived the doctor who saved her. But it did not outlive the lesson. That lesson lives every time someone measures instead of guesses, documents instead of forgets, sees a patient instead of a number or an enemy. It lives in protocols taught in medical schools, in humanitarian guidelines for famine relief, in the citations of Garrett's 1947 paper, and it lives here, in Box 23, waiting for the next person who needs to understand. The researcher makes a note, requests a copy of the protocol. She is working on a project in a refugee camp. There are people there who need careful feeding, who need someone to count them back to life, 1 ounce at a time. She does not know Greta's full story yet, but she will learn it. Because Greta made sure the story would be told, kept the button, kept the protocol, kept the letters, not for herself, for whoever came next. Outside the archive, Hamburg continues, rebuilt, thriving.
the scars mostly healed. Inside, in a climate-controlled room, a brass button waits. HVG, 1938. A building that fell, a woman who survived,
A doctor who cared.
and a lesson that remains. The most powerful weapon is not always the one that destroys. Sometimes it is the one that counts, that measures, that sees, that chooses, despite everything, to care. 87 pounds became 118. A number became a woman. An enemy became a patient, and a patient became a legacy. Box 23 closes. The researcher leaves, but the story stays, waiting, ready, for the next person who needs to know that even in the darkest collapse, even when systems fail and nations starve their own, there is another choice. The choice Garrett made in a hot Texas exam room in July 1945. The choice Greta honored for 57 years. The choice we can still make today. To see, to measure, to care. One person, one protocol, one life at a time.